So, y'all, thank you for being here. Y'all, the traditional welcome in Texas. Thanks for being here today, and I hope that you have an incredibly engaging experience today. These folks who are part of the panel today are some really astounding people that I have huge respect for and know that I could not do their jobs well. I dabble in politics, but they live it every day. And so I'm very happy to introduce them, and I'm going to just prompt them with questions and things like that. So they're going to do most of the talking today. In case you don't know me, I'm Professor Corey Colby. I'm a professor of government and politics here, as well as the SGA advisor. And I am past state president of the Association of Texas Professional Educators, which some of our guests are from today. And it is a pleasure to introduce to you our three panelists as part of this session for Women's History Month and the Women in Public Service Forum. There are three events happening on campus today at different times, so I'm sure we'll have other people trickle in or pass through as they try to split their time among these different events. So I want to welcome I'm going to start from left to right here, Jill Bullion, who is the executive director from the Bayou Land Conservancy, a fabulous community partner that we have here, and we are building a stronger partnership with. One of their locations that I absolutely hope that Jill will share with you more about actually butts up to our property just on the other side of Spring Creek here. With an outdoor learning center and trails and all kinds of different events for you to explore the outdoors. And they work in watershed areas around the area to preserve and protect these various environments and promote conservation efforts and education along that. So Jill's official title is executive director, but she also, as part of that role, has to lobby members of the legislature to be conscious of conservation and water issues and things. Next to Jill is Tricia Cave, who is a former educator and political activist and one of our lobbyists in Austin for the Association of Texas Professional Educators, which is the largest public educator association in the state of Texas, and who has previously worked with an organization, I believe volunteer work, right, with Texans for Public Education. Next to Tricia is a longtime friend of mine who now holds the title of Associate Executive Director for the Association of Texas Professional Educators, and who for a long time was the Director of Governmental Relations. Is that the correct title? Okay, so Director of Governmental Relations and a lobbyist and all-around kind of wonk about government and politics, and multi-talented individual, Jennifer Mitchell. So thank you very much for being here. I'm going to have each of them take a moment to talk a little bit about who they are, what they do, and their organizations. So have at it.
Thank you, Corey. I'm delighted to be here. As he mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Bayou Land Conservancy, so I'm the non-educator, not education person up here. But so I guess what I would tell you about what I do is I haven't been doing it my whole career. I've been in the nonprofit field for about 14 years now. I took a hard right turn from my previous career in marketing and advertising, so I'm a good example of, that career build over time and then burnout and, off ramp, then on ramp. But what I do now every day is I work for a land conservation organization. We do purposely look at the places along streams. So we're really wanting to conserve floody places. So our mission is to preserve land along streams for flood control, clean water, and wildlife. And we have about 15,000 acres in the Houston region that are under permanent protection, stretching from Bryan to Beaumont. But we focus on the Lake Houston watershed, which is the whole land area that drains into Lake Houston. So Northern Harris County, where we're sitting now, Spring Creek just behind us, all of Montgomery County, and then pieces of the counties around that. And all of that land mass, the water that falls from rain drains into Lake Houston, which provides 85% of the drinking water for the Metro Houston area. So even if you don't live in that area that we work, if you are in an area where that water, you're drinking that water, if it's in your glass or your coffee cup, you're welcome. We help keep that water a little bit cleaner. So I am not a full-time lobbyist or a full-time advocator either. An executive director wears many hats, but it is a key part of the job that I do every day, and it's not just statewide. We advocate on the local level, so it could be county commissioners, it could be city councils. We advocate on the state level. We partner with our state organization, the Texas Land Trust Council, and we also advocate on the federal level with our national organization, which is Land Trust Alliance. So we look at different partnerships and different issues depending on whether we're doing state, federal, or local advocacy.
Good morning. My name is Trisha Cave, and I am a lobbyist with the Association of Texas Professional Educators, which, as Corey mentioned, is the largest educator association in Texas. I started out as an educator in high school for 17 years. I taught government and U.S. history. Really kind of got involved in advocacy around 2016, found Texans for Public Education, joined that group, and then got bit by the advocacy bug. It's very hard to stay quiet when you feel like your profession is being targeted and your students are not being properly served. And so I got involved in Texans for Public Education, slowly kind of rose in the ranks there, built a name for myself in the advocacy world, and then started looking for opportunities to move into that full time, and was already a member of ATPE, and just the perfect opportunity fell in my lap, and I absolutely love what I do. I get to split my time between here in Houston and the Capitol and advocate for students and teachers in legislator offices at the Capitol every day when I'm there, and it's just the best job in the world. I can't describe enough how wonderful it is to be able to represent 5.5 million kids and all the teachers in this state and do things that are going to benefit them. So thank you so much for letting me be here.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Mitchell, and as Corey mentioned, I'm Associate Executive Director for the Association of Texas Professional Educators, which we call ATPE because it's a mouthful. And Professor Colby was state president, I don't know what year, but 16. Wow. I think, and I think the young, if not the youngest, one of the youngest, okay, second youngest that we ever had. So he's still a young man. I was going to give a little bit more background about the organization Tricia and I work for. You know, from the dawn of time, there was a statewide teachers association that pretty much every teacher belonged to, just about. And in the late 70s, they decided to merge with the National Education Association, which is a nationwide teachers union. And at that time, there were a number of people in Texas, obviously a pretty red state, who didn't like the idea of joining a union. So some of the educators decided to split off and form two different groups. One was the Association of Texas Educators. The other one was Texas Professional Educators. And in 1980, they decided to merge and form our association. And in pretty short order, we grew to become the largest teachers association, not only in Texas, but in the country for a long time. Currently, we have about 80,000 members. We have seen a decline in our membership because, frankly, a number of people are leaving the teaching profession for different reasons, like Tricia. But you know, we at one time we had I think 117,000 members. So we've always been a pretty large association, and our focus is only in Texas. That was a big thing that spurred our formation, is not wanting to be tied to a parent organization at the national level. So we get to set our own agenda, and that's not to say we don't we still participate in federal issues. We have a lobbyist who works for us up in DC so that we can do some of that work. But our focus has been mostly here in Texas, and we have about 60 employees. So for a nonprofit association, we're considered fairly large. We have an annual budget of about $15 million, and I've been part of the organization since 2004, so 20 years. I was initially hired as a lobbyist, and then I went from lobbyist to senior lobbyist to governmental relations manager to governmental relations director, and now to associate executive director. And in my current role, I oversee several different departments at ATPE, events, marketing, communications and engagement, membership, and last but not least, governmental relations. So I continue to be a registered lobbyist for the association, and help them out when needed at the Capitol, and oversee their advocacy program. But I get to work on some other areas of the association work as well. So I am originally from Louisiana. Go Tigers! Sorry. I am a wonk. I did have an interest in politics my whole life. My father had been an elected judge. So that, I grew up in that world, with my parents being very active in politics. And I expected to go to law school, follow in my father's footsteps somewhat. And for various reasons, I veered off that course, and I found myself I had a degree in speech communication. I had gone to law school for 1 year, and I had no idea what I was going to do with my life at that point. So, but the area I was most familiar with was law. So I went to work for a small law firm in Louisiana. Worked there 6 years, doing mostly legal writing. But then, again, for various reasons, I said, I've got to get out of this. I've got to go do something else. And I saw a job description that piqued my interest to go work for the Louisiana Dental Association. And the role was Director of Communications and Public Affairs. This was a small staff association. They only had about 5 staff at the time. So my role was going to cover everything from creating their magazine, their quarterly magazine, from start to finish, to doing some lobbying work at the Capitol. So I thought, well, that touches on different things I'm interested in, so let's give that a try. And I became hooked pretty quickly on the lobbying side of it, especially, and really enjoyed working for a trade association. Representing the dentists. I know people hate going to the dentist, but they are actually a great group of people to work with. So that was a lot of fun. I was doing state level and some federal level lobbying there. But then life took me to Texas. So once I got to Texas, I got the offer to come work for ATPE as a lobbyist. Interestingly, on the same day I got that job offer, I was offered a job being an assistant to a lobbyist who at that time was the highest paid lobbyist in Texas. And he represented big corporations, and he, made a lot of money. And I was really torn. And sometimes I think, what if I had gone down that road? I would have been working with clients that are really the polar opposite of the group I work for now. And I remember I was talking to my sister-in-law about it, and she said, this is a no-brainer. You can be a lobbyist or a lobbyist assistant. Go be a lobbyist, So that's what took me to ATPE, and I've been there ever since. And I would say in the last 10 years, 9 or 10 years, I decided to pivot my career focus a little bit into association management. So in 2016, I earned my CAE, Certified Association Executive credential, which tells the world that, I'm supposed to be qualified to run a nonprofit association successfully. And I've really become an ambassador for association work. I've been on the board of the Texas Society for Association Executives, which is kind of the association for associations. And I've learned that there is an association out there for everything under the sun. Whatever you're interested in, if it's music, if it's plumbing, there exists an association for that. And they all have an interest in governmental affairs because they're all subject to regulations and laws that are passed at the state and federal level, and so they have to be concerned about that. So many of those are smaller groups that may only have one staffer who, as Jill mentioned, as executive director, you do everything. But there's definitely an element to working with the government in that role. So that's kind of where I am now.
Yeah. So you can see, even from our previous guest as well, you can see, you start off going, I have an interest in this thing, and it kind of starts taking you, well, I think I'd like to switch it a little bit this direction, a little bit, it takes you to these different places. So I want to, so the emphasis has been, right, this is Women's History Month, we have accomplished women as well, but I don't, that's not the narrative, right, as far as it's not just because they're women that they're in this role. They're successful in their positions and happen to be women. So I want to a little bit talk to you all about, Jennifer gave a great kind of summary of how she got there. How did you two end up in this spot? You talked about you had a previous history in marketing and advertising. You were a teacher. So can you give us a little bit more about how you got to these positions you're in now?
Happy to. Yeah. So as I mentioned, actually I went to, I'm from Nebraska, so go Big Red, whatever. Anyway.
Somebody ought to say go UA.
Right. I actually, my degree is in journalism, but I am a lifelong learner. I didn't really realize it at that time, but I left college with 4 minors in English, marketing, sociology, and women's studies. But it turns out those are still my passions, right? So I moved to Houston area the minute I graduated and went to work at an advertising agency and worked there for about 6 years. And then my husband, that's where I met my husband, and he and I quit our jobs on the same day and opened our own graphic design and marketing firm. So we actually worked together for about 20 years doing that. And we are still married, but I will caution you, if you're ever going to work with your spouse, you must have boundaries around that. That's a whole other conversation. But he was getting to the point where he was like, yeah, I think I might, retire or do other things. And I was completely burnt out in my career. And every time somebody would offer me a marketing job, I could just feel this in my stomach. I was like, oh, I can't do it. So I was actually in a leadership program, Leadership North Houston, which is hosted by Lone Star College. And I went through that program about 2004, and we had a month that the focus was on economic and community development. I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know people could have jobs like that. And it was fascinating to me. I was like, what do these people do? So I got involved in a committee at the Chamber of Commerce that I belonged to that was about economic development. And next thing you know, I have the woman who ran the program said, you would be a great community developer. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. What does that person do? Well, once again, I ended up at Lone Star College because Lone Star College hosts a program called Community Development Institute, which is a national program. It's a 3-year program. You go for a whole week and you get immersed into community development concepts. So she's like, just go for the first year and just see. So I went that first week, spent a week with people that were city managers and, in politics, Chamber of Commerce people. And I left the end of the week and I was like, oh my God, these are my people. These are my people. And then from then on, it was like, how do I get to that place where they are? So I just started following breadcrumbs. I had no idea that it was a really narrow field and there wasn't very many opportunities, but I was determined that I was going to figure out a way to get into community development. So I ended up doing consulting work for a Chamber of Commerce, made like hardly any money for about a year. But then I got hired by a watershed organization that had just started up in the Houston area, the Greens Bayou Coalition, and became their executive director. And that was my first opportunity to advocate. I had never done any kind of advocacy before. I had never been in a political office that I ever remember at all. And one of the main reasons that organization was formed was for flood mitigation. And there was a federal project in the watershed that had been authorized back in like it was in President Truman's plan. It went back that far. But when Alicia hit in like 1990, that area was just devastated. And so there was a federal project that needed funding that no one could get funding for. So we had a committee. We started going back and forth to Washington, D.C. It was a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project, so I had to learn all about the Corps. And it was really just such a great experience because I learned how to be an effective advocate. And we got the project funded in 2015. It was a $25 million project. So I was like, wow, in real people who work for nonprofits can have a huge impact. And it really impacted the way I looked at advocacy. So now in my job, I'm advocating for a little bit, still, those green spaces outside, but it's a little bit different. So, we look at, what's in the farm bill at the federal government, what is the USDA doing, because they do fund a lot of conservation programs, what's going on. I hate to tell you guys that you'll be disappointed. The state of Texas has so very little funding for conservation compared to other states. It's very sad. When I talk to my conservation colleagues from across the country and they're telling me about these projects they're doing because the state of Florida, also a very, very politically conservative state, has all this money for conservation, it's heartbreaking. But it's still worth it. We can talk about, individual things. We got a pipeline from going through one of our preserves this year. We got it to go underground instead of making a huge scar across one of our preserves. So that was advocacy. That was a huge advocacy win for an organization like ours. So there's a lot of different ways you can get into advocacy. You can come through the back door like me.
Trisha, you too, right?
So I always wanted to be a teacher from the time that I was a very small child. In fact, when I crossed the stage at graduation, my principal shook my hand and said, "I'll see you in 4 years." And I used to joke that I would be buried at my alma mater, which was Pasadena High School. Really wanted to spend my whole career there. Loved it. And I used to really keep my nose to the grindstone and just kind of focus on my work. And when people would come to me and tell me, "Hey, this is what's going on at the legislature. We're going to go testify. We're going to go do that," I'd be like, "I don't have time for that. It doesn't matter what happens up there. That doesn't matter to me. I'm going to focus on my classroom." Yeah. 2011 happened, and for those of you who were too young to remember what happened in 2011 in Texas to teachers and schools, what happened is major budget cuts. And a lot of my close friends got laid off. A lot of positions got consolidated. A lot of budgets got cut for programs in the school, including the program I was running, which was the academic decathlon program. And So I started to pay a little bit more attention. And then in 2016, a friend of mine put me into Texans for Public Education, which is actually not something you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to put people into the group. It's a no-no. But I got added. I got added to the group on Facebook, and I would read some of the things people were saying, and I'm like, do these people not know what's going on? Like, people don't get it. So I started commenting a lot, and then that would make me mad. And anybody who knows me knows if I'm mad about something, I'm going to try to change it. And so basically, I sent the admin of the group a message. He was sitting in the back, actually, my friend Troy. And I said, hey, I would really like to get more involved. And he set me up to start doing the research for the group. And what actually happened that got me to really commit to it was I lost a couple of family members, close family members, within a few months, and I was sitting at my grandmother's bedside. She was dying of cancer, and I couldn't focus on that, so I threw all of my attention into research for Texans for Public Ed, and just kind of decided that that I had to do something, and this was something tangible that I could do. And so I decided to make that full commitment, and I kind of pushed my way into being the second person in the group behind the founder through stubbornness and butting heads with people because I believed in it, and I wanted to do something for the teachers in this state and the students in the state who are not getting what they deserve and what they've earned. And so I did that for several years, and I would go with them and do lobby days, and we would do rallies, and all of that was great. But I started realizing, I like to say I didn't fall out of love with teaching, because it wasn't that I didn't love teaching. I fell in love with advocacy. And when it started occupying more and more of my focus and more of my time, I started to realize that that's where I wanted to be. And it's really kind of funny. I remember, so I started applying for jobs in this field, and education advocacy is a pretty small field. There's 4 major teacher groups, and there's a couple of other groups that advocate for different things in the education world, and not a lot else. So the opportunities in the field were somewhat limited, but I kept applying, and I remember sitting in my classroom last January at the start of last session and watching them swear in the legislators at the start of the last session and going, oh my gosh, I wish I was there, and actually posting something about that and how much I really wanted to be there. And 3 weeks later, I was interviewing for ATPE. It's just funny how things work out. So ATPE, the way that I got into ATPE was, obviously I was looking for a position. I knew I wanted to do advocacy. Lobbying is obviously very much advocacy tied, and so I applied for the position over Thanksgiving, kind of forgot about it, didn't hear anything, thought no big deal. January, I heard back from them. From first interview to hired was a few days. It just kind of was the easiest and best fit that I've ever had in my life. And by February, I was there where I wanted to be. And I told them from the beginning, it really just feels like I fell into my dream job, and that's very true. I don't feel like it's work. I get to work closely with teachers and do things for them that will benefit them and their kids, which is an honor to me. I get to work with legislators who deeply care about public education, which is, they do exist, they are out there, and that is very humbling. And the staff that I work with is just incredible and deeply, deeply cares about the field. And it makes all the difference in the world when you find a position that you genuinely love and can't wait to get up in the morning and go to work for. So that's how I got there.
Can I elaborate a little bit on Trisha's hiring? because it was during the holidays, which is a terrible time to be trying to fill a position. We were doing a major staff restructuring, and so resumes were coming to our HR director. She would forward them to me to look at, and then I was forwarding them on to Trisha's now boss. And we weren't getting a lot of really good resumes, and her boss called me and said, you know, how's it looking? And I'm kind of flipping through the list. And I said, ooh, what do you think about Trisha Cave? And he went, oh my God, yes. And because she had established her reputation as a volunteer. I mean, she was not a paid advocate, but her volunteer work was so impressive, we almost didn't interview anybody else, so. We were
I've never heard that before. Thank you.
So all of them have said the word nonprofit at some point. I want to be clear that nonprofit doesn't mean that they're doing volunteer work. They're all getting paid for their position. So would y'all be willing to talk a little bit about like how a nonprofit is organized, contrary to maybe a for-profit, and what are the risks and rewards for working in a nonprofit? And I don't care who fields the question.
Sure. I'll start with that one. So to be a nonprofit organization, you have to be certified as such by the IRS. And that it's not to say that you aren't bringing in money, because obviously revenue does come in to keep our associations going. But we're not existing in order to make a profit. And under the IRS code, there are several different types of nonprofit organizations, which, you know, we don't have to go into the differences between all of those. That would take a while. But most people are familiar with a 501c3. Those are your charities. So that's going to be your American Heart Association, right, your United Way, conservancies. Yep. Yeah. But then what ATPE is actually a 501c6. We are a trade association. There are other types of associations, but we exist to represent an industry, in this case, public education in Texas, and do things to further education, with advocacy being a big part of that. Most of the teachers who join our group do so for the legal protection we give them, but also for our advocacy work. So that's definitely, you know, one of our top, you know, a big part of our mission there. When you work for a C3, technically you're not really allowed to lobby very much. It's supposed to be a very small percentage of your work that you do, but you know, I think you can interpret lobbying strictly the way it's defined in statute, or I usually use the word advocacy because I think it's broader than that. But even if you are working for a charity association, you know, as Jill mentioned, you have to be concerned about what's happening in regulations and legislation, and you have to build relationships with the people who hold those offices that are, you know, making the decisions that affect the group you represent.
Yeah, I'll just, so we are a 501c3, which means we are a charitable nonprofit, and we take money from, you know, private individuals like yourselves and put that into a public good. So we, you know, we can take some funding from government agencies, but it needs to be a minority of our funding. We also are limited to how much money we can spend on advocacy. So, you know, my advocacy budget is a pretty small part of my budget. But like Jennifer said, there's an intersection with everything that we do with public policy. So knowing what's going on and knowing, you know, who to talk to and who to educate about a particular issue around conservation and how that serves the whole community is a very important part of our mission.
And just so you know, so if you give to a 501c3, that's tax deductible. Yeah,
right.
If you give to a 501c6, it is not tax deductible.
Correct.
So because of the nature of their work. So, Tricia, were you going to add? I saw the mic move. Go ahead.
I was just going to add about lobbying a little bit, that I think that there is a misconception that lobbyists are people who spend loads and loads of cash trying to buy votes on a particular issue, and I think it's really important to note that we do a lot of relationship building and a lot of just communication with members of the legislature and members of the community. In addition to working inside the Capitol, we run a blog and we run a podcast, and we attempt to educate the public as a whole in addition to doing the relationship building and the important work that we do inside the Capitol. But we do not go and spend money on legislators and try to buy their votes. Occasionally we might buy them lunch, but that's about the extent of how that goes. It's really more about meeting them, learning about their interests, building true relationships and friendships with them, and getting to know who the people are who can make a difference in the particular field that you are trying to advocate for. So for public education, I'm going to want to get to know the Public Education Committee in the House. I have a colleague who works very closely with the Public Education Committee on the Senate side. And so those are the people that I really worked closely with. Did I go into 150 members' offices over the course of last session? There's no way I could have. I worked really closely with the people who could help us and built those relationships and those ties, and those are going to continue to serve me as we go into next session. So I just wanted to dispel some rumors. We are not people that are out there with boatloads of cash. They pay me very well, but I'm not paid that well trying to buy votes. That's just not the case.
And there's a segue here, and I appreciate you giving me the off-ramp here, which is, I've mentioned to you in class, if you're in my classes, that, there's this perception that lobbyists are kind of, devil horn people that are out to screw the government and the public.
Some of them are.
Some are. Particularly, I'm not going to name any names, obviously, but I'm not as a public employee. But you see here people who are working in areas in which they're passionate, right? This is part of nonprofit organization advocacy, is largely tied to doing public good, advocating for different professional fields, things like that. Certainly not super PACs, which could be individually funded by millionaires or billionaires, or working for large corporations individually, funneling money into the system that way. So there's a conversation to be had there. What Tricia said is, right, this idea that lobbyists are going in and buying votes certainly is not the case. And part of the reason it gets a bad reputation is the public always finds out when people are going in and buying votes, right? That's why it makes the news, because it's illegal and rare. So what they're doing is they're going in and using the funding that goes to the organizations to advocate for a position that they have and build relationships with people they think will carry the message for them. Matter of fact, one of the things we talk about is that information is perhaps one of the biggest tools that you have. Mm-hmm. So can y'all talk about the role that information plays in building those relationships and in helping legislators create policy that supports your members and the public good?
Let me, I'm going to go back really fast and talk about building those connections with legislators. So sometimes it's not even about your field. One of the areas where I built connections with the chairman of the Public Education Committee this year, Brad Buckley, is my daughter wants to be a veterinary neurologist, and she wants to go to Texas A&M University. She's a senior right now, and Brad Buckley is not a neurologist. He is a veterinarian, and he went to Texas A&M, and through that connection and him offering, he was very kind and offered for my daughter to come and shadow him in his clinic, and has written a letter of recommendation for my daughter, and has offered a lot of advice. She has his cell phone number. Yeah, it's just little things like that where you find areas of connection. Representative Ernest Bales, his son and my daughter are both going to A&M next year. His oldest son, Cinco, is a senior, and they're both going to go to A&M, and they're both going to be in ag science. So we've made connections that way. And so it's not really just about making connections solely based on your work experience, they're people. They're just like you and me. They're not up on a pedestal. They're not any different than us. And so it's very easy to make those connections and then build off of that. And so as far as going back now to the information, once you've built that foundation, then you can go back and say, I know that you think this. Are you aware that this is occurring? And especially for me as a teacher, this being my first session, honestly, I was fairly intimidated. Like it's intimidating to walk into a legislator's office and try to convince them to vote your way on a certain bill, or just in general to be more friendly to public education. And you would be very pleasantly surprised by how much they value the knowledge that community members bring into their offices. The fact that I'm a teacher, my boss's name is Monty. I would go into an office with Monty, and I know Monty's been doing this for 20 years, and he's got a lot of ties, and he's very experienced, and people really respect him. And I would see legislators turn to me and go, okay, you were a teacher, what do you think? And that experience is very valuable. So don't discount the experience that you have just as a member of the community, as a student, as a person who values whatever it is that you value that you want to go advocate for. They really care about that experience. And it matters in terms of not even just knowing the facts and the data, just in terms of calling them. I've sat in legislators' offices and watched their staff tally the phone calls. You may think that those calls and those emails do not matter. They absolutely do. They're critical. And I've seen legislators walk into offices and say, how many calls have we gotten today? What are they about? They really do want to hear from community members and really do want to hear what you have to say. It does matter. So once you've built that relationship, once you've established that relationship, then you can come in with the expertise and say, have you considered this perspective? And usually you will get somewhere with them. Like I said, they're just people. It's all about just building those connections, and from there you can really kind of get an inroads into getting what you want done.
And I would just add that becoming a trusted resource for someone who's in elected office, and I don't have the same opportunity to build those relationships as you do, because it's more around, when I can, when I have time to do that. But still, I mean, just knowing, for instance, Corey mentioned our Arrowwood Preserve across Spring Creek, and last spring we had a ribbon cutting for outdoor classroom that we had built out there, and yesterday actually we had a open house for administrative and professors from here, so that they can see how to plug you all into using the space. But we had some folks from the congressional offices attend that open house. And, I met somebody from Congressman Hunt's office, and she's gone on a tour of the preserve. It's really important for them to have that hands-on experience. And so now she feels really comfortable reaching out to me when she has questions about things. I'm dealing, I've got this neighborhood that, I'm working with. They're having this issue, what resources do you know about there? What can I do to help them? Can I connect you with them? So that's really, what I'm looking for is, how can I be a resource for that person's office?
Yeah, you raise a good point about being the person that people know they can call, right? And so in your particular, right, y'all go to legislators in many cases, even in their home districts. So, we want to make clear, in Texas we have a part-time legislature. So y'all end up traveling, to wherever that person is, not necessarily just the legislature. But in this situation where you have a smaller staff nonprofit, right, where people share a lot of hats, bringing the legislator or their staff to you to become a trusted source and going look at the work we're doing here, right, and building that relationship. In both of these situations, being identified as a reliable source of information, right, somebody that can be trusted, that keeps their word, is critical, right, and that may be the biggest benefit that you provide. What about writing draft legislation? Do any of y'all do that? As far as like,
We
or
have.
getting inserted language?
Yeah, that's a big part of it, is writing the language to change, either writing the bill from scratch or, to change the bills.
So off the top of my head, one that I can think of that I worked directly on this session. There was a bill, it was HB 621 for the nerds that want to look it up. There was a bill that would have allowed veterans to become educators, and it would have lowered the requirements, the education requirements for that to happen. And we were very concerned, not that we don't want veterans in the classroom, we absolutely do, that's wonderful. But we were concerned about how far the bar was being lowered, and the fact that the expectation wasn't that somewhere along that path, once they got into the classroom, they would go and learn and grow their craft and become full-time certified educators. And so we went in and we worked with the bill author, who his name is Matt Shaheen, and kind of got him to see that it probably wasn't wise to just throw somebody who had no classroom experience into a classroom full of high schoolers and expect them to make that work. And so he was willing to institute a requirement where now the bill says, and it did pass and it is now law, the bill says that they have 3 years to earn their full certification, and if they don't earn that certification within those 3 years, then they are no longer certified and they can't work in that position anymore. So little things like that you may not think are super important, but in the long term, if we start lowering requirements for teachers, then it becomes a downhill slide where we don't have the most qualified educators in the classroom, and of course we want that because that's how you get where you are. So that's one direct impact I can think of from this session.
I wanted to say a little bit about where most bills originate and where they are written, because a lot of the bigger bills we see coming down, they're not original.
Nope.
And they didn't come from somebody in Texas. So whenever you have high-profile legislation in other states, I'll use as an example, Florida passed a bill to restrict what teachers can talk about in the classroom, and colloquially, it's known as the Don't Say Gay bill, and it makes national news, and it becomes this high-profile thing. Well, suddenly, every legislature in the country has that bill filed, and it is the exact same bill, the exact same language, with a few tweaks, to match up with Texas law. So you get a lot of those. With smaller bills, it's often one person in the district has gone to their legislator and said, I've got this problem, will you fix it? And they send it off to what's called the Texas Legislative Council. That is a group of attorneys that write the bills and put them in the format to go through the legislature. They usually, rarely are they going to have actual subject matter expertise in what they're writing. So you can end up with something that's really not well written or effective, and the legislator files it, and then he'll start hearing from groups like ours who have various opinions on the bills, and we'll try to get them to tweak the bills and change it and put our language in instead. And usually that's a compromise. You've got people on both sides coming to the legislator, and if he's good at his job, he'll say, okay, let's all get in a room and figure out what we can live with and get the bill passed.
So you hit, in conversation just a second ago, we had Representative Cecil Bell here on campus this week, and one of the things he said is, the difference for a legislator, Tricia said this, matter of fact, a legislator who hears from one person 15 times versus a legislator who hears from 15 people on the same issue, and the difference in impact that has. So I want to talk about what you view as the impact that members can have and the public can have if they kind of work together to have an impact on an issue. And then how do you get the public aware of your issue or your membership aware of an issue? Teachers, especially right now, we're heading into April and May, and there's tons of benchmarks and there's tons of STAR testing, which everyone here loves STAR testing. Yes? Y'all good? STAR tests? No? Okay, so, but, you know, they obviously can't pay attention to the legislative session as they're doing this. So, and of course, for you as well, right? Making people aware of like what's going into the watersheds and how we can, you know, the reason we have to protect these. How is it that y'all get your membership or your donors or people like that activated so that they're contacting legislators to have an impact?
I'll use that example that I talked about from my last job, where we got the federal funding, because that was a multi-year effort, and it really wasn't so much about. Well, we were looking for particular language to hit into any an applicable federal bill, but it ended up getting put into the president's budget and being picked up from there. But what we were doing was we were working with a community that had been flooded badly multiple times. And a lot of those folks were paying way more in flood insurance, if they could even afford flood insurance, which many of them could not. And those that were paying for flood insurance, I mean, compared to what like I was paying in flood insurance, it was like 10 times more. But it was also a community of folks that, mom and everybody had a job. They just did not have time. They didn't have the bandwidth to really advocate on their own behalves. So we actually did a lot of polling of the, folks that would be around that project. We actually had a letter writing campaign that we organized at one point to specific legislative offices and agencies. And so, we got to the point when we would walk into an office in D.C., they knew that when we said we were from the Greens Bayou Coalition, that we were representing a watershed that had, about 500,000 people living in it. And, really just brought that home. And the other thing that we did strategically is we would go to congressional offices of people outside of our area. We were working with 3 different congressmen that represented that particular area, but we would go to, a congressman from Mississippi's office that we knew had flooding issues. And we would say, hey, we want to, partner and, help, you are concerned about flooding, we're concerned about flooding. So, we tried to consistently show that there was, there might have been 4 people sitting in that office, but there was, 500,000 people sitting behind us.
So I think one of the reasons why educators join associations like ours is obviously for the insurance, like Jennifer mentioned earlier, but also because they're paying people to do advocacy on their behalf at the Capitol. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that. But also our members being there and speaking for themselves on behalf of the association and on behalf of their schools and their students is a very vital part of what we do. And so there's a lot that goes into that. We host a lobby day, is it every other year? Where we bring members up to the Capitol to advocate for themselves and meet with their legislators. We have a blog where we regularly post updates about what is happening in the Capitol, what's happening in DC, anything that the various organizations like TEA do that genuinely impacts their classroom. And we do a podcast where we try to educate through that media, and just in general, we try to educate our members and make sure that they're informed. We try to offer opportunities for them to come up and make a difference for themselves. And then we offer the service of being able to have somebody come in and lobby on your behalf. And when we walk through the door and we say ATPE, the members of the legislature know that we represent 80,000 educators, and that's very powerful. But when a teacher walks through the door and says, I'm a teacher, I left my classroom today to be here, that really catches their attention. That matters. So I think that while our association definitely provides a very important service, there's a lot to be said for walking through the door yourself, introducing yourself, shaking your hand, and making your position clear on an issue. And so I'm happy that we partner with our members to be able to help them do that.
Yeah, I agree. Grassroots involvement is essential because, yes, as a paid advocate, I can call Cecil Bell 15 times for you, but it's going to be much better if you all who live in his district call him, because lawmakers want to hear from their own constituents. And it's because they want to get reelected or they're going to run for higher office. And so they really care more about hearing from those people than hearing from us. I mean, we still have to build our reputation and credibility as subject matter experts, but they want to hear from the grassroots. And I think our job in that regard is just making it as easy as possible. And technology really comes into play there. And now AI is kind of a game changer in that sense, because we can send a text message to our teacher who is in the classroom, click this button and it's going to send a message to your lawmaker. So that's what they can do when they're in the middle of STAR testing or something like that. So a lot of what we do is just trying to make it easier for them to advocate as volunteers.
So I'm shifting gears a little bit, right? It's Women's History Month. Y'all are in a field, all of you are in a space that has been historically dominated by male figures. Especially not just the lobbying and organizational leadership space, but you're meeting with politicians that overwhelmingly are male. Can you talk a little bit about any challenges or successes you've faced related to leading in a space that has historically been male, and all of y'all are now in leadership positions in that space? Challenges or successes, either.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And in politics, I would say there is still a good old boys network, sadly. And we do have to contend with that. I will also say, I'm going to get controversial here, but I'm not going to name any names. There are female lobbyists in Texas who have become very successful by sleeping around at the Capitol. I'm not going to lie. And they've made they've made a lot of money. But for those of us who aren't willing to do that, to prostitute ourselves as a career, you have to be the smartest person in the room. Don't act like you're the smartest person in the room. Don't say you're the smartest person in the room, but you need to be the smartest person in a room full of smart people and build your reputation that way.
Yeah, I think building on what Jennifer said, and I did not know I signed up for a prostitution conversation.
Me either.
I think that just refusing to have your voice silenced, I think that you have to be assertive and make sure that people understand that you know what you're talking about. You can't go in and be timid. And I kind of do have more, believe it or not, I know that probably this is a little bit of a surprise, but I actually kind of do have more of a reserved, timid personality when I don't have a microphone in my hand. Troy's making a face at me. I do. And so I do have to kind of turn myself on to, okay, now I am the expert in the room and it's time for me to give my opinion. And know that that's okay, and that just because this person sitting in front of me has been sitting in the Texas Capitol for 15 years doesn't make them any more skilled or more of an expert than me, especially in the education field. And I think you can be assertive without being domineering, and I think that that's very important. And like I said, making those connections and making it clear that at the end of the day, after you have a battle on a contentious issue, you're still going to be able to shake that person's hand and look them in the eye and be friends and work with them is really, really important. And I think that women have an innate ability to make those deep connections with people and figure out on a personal level how to make that work and how to connect that to what we're doing for work in a way that's not crossing a line and being inappropriate.
Beautifully said.
So I think that just going in and acting like you know what you're talking about, like fake it till you make it, even if you don't necessarily, which I do, I'm not saying I don't, but even if you don't necessarily feel like you're the best expert in the room, go in and act like you are. I know what I'm talking about. I'm here for a reason, and I want you to listen to me. So I think that that's really critical.
I'm going to flip that on its head just a little bit, because I'm not disagreeing with that, but there's other circumstances. So I talked a little bit about my career change. And so in the last, dozen years, I've found myself in rooms with all men. Most of them are either civil engineers. One of the issues that I work on quite a lot is aggregate mining, sand and gravel mining, because it's a really huge impact along streams, especially in the Houston area. And we helped start a statewide organization called Texas for Responsible Aggregate Mining. So I've been in the only woman in a room full of grumpy old men who are sand and gravel mining guys. And, yeah, that is. So, I mean, yes, I'm really sitting on the opposite side of the viewpoint of, and I'm looking at them thinking, man, you're just ruining the world. And they're looking at me like, you're just a tree hugger. And what I decided was I have to put aside my, my reticence to ask questions. I have to be able to be the one in the room that says, hey, wait a minute. What are you talking about exactly? What is that, that jargon that you're throwing out? And what is that, tell me like I'm a fourth grader. What does that mean exactly? And not be embarrassed because either I don't know or I want to hear them say what I know they don't really want to say, right? So I just kind of decided I had to get over myself, So
Part of being the smartest person in the room, right, is like being able to coax out of them the things they don't want to say.
I think that that's also a really good method for making sure that you're understanding clearly what they're trying to communicate with you, because sometimes, especially if you're talking to members of the legislature or even staff, sometimes they can get really bogged down in wonkiness. And so it's very good to develop those skills to make sure that you understand exactly what it is that they're trying to communicate with you. And a way to do that is to say, hey, can you repeat that? I want to really make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. So yeah, I think that that's really good. I don't think you contradicted me at all.
Same. So you brought up staff, and one of the things that I know I've experienced with folks when we go to the Capitol is that you get people who are disappointed they're not meeting with the elected official.
no.
Right. They're like, I wanted to meet with Representative so-and-so or Senator so-and-so, and right, my message isn't going to get across because I didn't meet with them. Can you talk about the importance of relationships with staff members and these folks, if they're wanting to contact or meet with an office, how actually meeting with staff may be better?
The staff run the Capitol, y'all.
Young people run Austin and Washington.
And they are people your age. They are college students, many of them. They are young and energetic and eager. And those young men and women are who are running that Capitol building. 100%. The staff are for me, that's where I've had my biggest ends. My relationships with staff have led to the best relationships I have with legislators. You cannot discount the staff. And also, that's also kind of condescending, to be perfectly honest. The idea that because they're not the person on the floor punching the button somehow means that they're less important. These are the people that are doing all of the research. In many cases, they're writing the legislation. They're the ones meeting with the subject matter experts. These are absolutely people that you want to get to know and cultivate a relationship with. And in many cases, some of them become legislators. I can think of one off the top of my head, Representative Christian Manuel, who represents close to the Beaumont area. He used to be a staffer. So it's very important to build those relationships with staff, and they remember how you treat them, and how you treat them is often going to determine whether or not they're going to get you a meeting with their representative, and how they're going to talk about you to that representative. So I would never discount those relationships are the most important relationships you build.
At the 2021 session, I was, making calls to offices for some, I think it was sand and gravel mining stuff, but I realized that like 50% or more of the people I was talking to were named Braden. So I think in about, 10 years, 15 years, like the legislature will be run by people named Braden. That's my...
Funny and true. So I'm about to shift to take questions from them. What would you tell somebody who thinks that they don't matter, as far as like their voice doesn't matter with the legislature, that maybe they haven't thought about that? And then I have one question left, and we'll go to Q&A.
You matter more than I do in terms of the fact that I'm a lobbyist, and they know that I'm getting paid to walk into their door every day. It's not that they don't care about what I have to say, but they want to hear from their constituents. I can't vote for them. I can vote for my representative. I won't, but I could. But they know at the end of the day, I can't vote for them. And hearing from their constituents is a very powerful thing, which is why when you call, a lot of the members will ask you, or the staff will ask you, what is your zip code? Where do you live? They want to make sure that the people that they're hearing from, whose opinions are influencing their ultimate vote, are the people that live in their district, who they represent, who are working in that community, and who are going to be impacted by their decisions. I have personally seen grassroots movements make huge shifts and impacts in the legislature. The fact is that this year, I'm sure most of you heard the big issue that the governor was pushing this year in public education was school vouchers, which was our big fight this session, because that is absolutely the worst thing that could happen to public education. And what really mattered to those legislators was how many educator phone calls and postcards and visits and rallies they received. And they heard from community members who told them how this was going to impact their students, their kids, their community. And that really made a difference in a lot of the legislators who were kind of on the fence about whether or not they were going to vote for this. Especially, I'll give an example. A lot of the legislators who are now facing tough re-elections because of this issue were rural Republican legislators. And the reason why they voted the way that they did on the issue of school vouchers was because even though the governor was putting immense pressure on them and saying, you're going to vote for this, you're going to get in line, and you're going to support this issue for me, they're hearing from their school boards, and they're hearing from their school superintendents, and they're hearing from their teachers about the impact that school vouchers would have on their local public schools, areas where the public school is the largest employer in the region, areas where the public school is literally the center of their life, and everything that happens in that community stems from the local public school. All of their community events happen in the school gym. Those opinions absolutely mattered, and to the credit of those legislators, they were willing to risk their political careers to stand up and say, my community doesn't want this. So the impact that a community member can have, or a group of community members can have, is huge and cannot be discounted. I would not be where I am if it weren't for 30,000 teachers getting on Facebook and clicking a like button and joining Texans for Public Education and deciding that the one thing they could do would be to gather and make sure that their voice was heard. From there, I was involved with rallies, I was involved with community days at the Capitol, I was involved in phone meltdowns where we would hear, hey, something's happening at the Capitol and we need to blow up these legislators' phones, not literally blow up, obviously, and make it very clear to them how we feel. And I can think of one issue off the top of my head where we had kind of a voucher light issue that was stuck into a bill. Wasn't a full voucher, but it was something that could lead that way. And we called and called and called, and that legislator pulled that issue out of the bill. So it absolutely does happen, and your voice absolutely does matter. And the associations can work for you and advocate for you, and we absolutely do that, and I love doing that. But there's nothing like them hearing from their constituents.
So, my last question is, let's see. You came out of advertising and marketing. You came out of education. You have a speech comms background. The other lobbyists that I know, let's see, one was a legislative staffer, right? Was Monty a legislative staffer?
Yes, he does.
Yeah,
And he has
yeah.
a law degree, right?
Mhm.
And so he has a law degree. We have another one who was a television news personality. And who am I missing?
Our three lobbyists, like he said, one of them has a background in, he's gone to law school, he's a lawyer, and he was a legislative staffer before that, so he has kind of a varied background and really good ability to kind of dig into the actual meat of the bill and kind of help with writing good sample text. We have another guy our senior lobbyist, who came from news and media, and used to be on the radio here in Houston, actually, and then moved to Austin and became a news anchor in Austin, and then from there decided he wanted to lobby at the Capitol. And then you have myself. I spent 17 years in the classroom, and that's my work experience. The rest of my experience is volunteer experience. And while that's important, and it really did help land me where I am, my classroom experience is what people look to when they're asking me questions on our team, because we have this different breadth of experience where we have all these different fields covered. And then we just hired a lobbyist whose start date was actually last week, who is a current school board member and has done a lot of community volunteering on like Rotary and things like that. And she's on a board of an organization called TAMSA, which we kind of jokingly call Mothers Against Drunk Testing.
She started out in real estate.
Yes. Yeah, they are a group that advocates against the standardized tests that you guys have to take every year, or you had to take every year. So she has also a lot of experience in varied, areas of policy. And when you put all of that together, it really makes a really solid team. And we're just very fortunate to have that.
Yeah, I think that the issue here is, right, you don't necessarily, your degree doesn't necessarily have to lead to that, right?
No, mine's in history.
Right, you end up in advocacy. So I have like 3 minutes left to take questions. So questions from you all about lobbying, communications, whatever. Go ahead.
Do you work specifically with any groups in Houston that also work to protect wetlands, like the Houston, I think it's American Indian Affairs committees?
No, not specifically with them, but we do have a lot of partners here in Houston, because I mentioned we do local advocacy as well. So other land conservation organizations here in Houston, Bayou City Waterkeeper has a high, interest in wetland protection. So we do partner with other groups quite a lot.
Thank you. Question?
Mine is making what someone I heard on the news do, calling to your representative, making threats. What if you're not very versed in in the conversation with what you guys are giving us, and we want to speak passionately about something that we would like changed or looked at and stuff? How do you communicate when they pick up that phone and say, this is so-and-so's office? I mean, what do you say at that moment? Because me, myself, wrong number, I'm sorry.
So how do you know what to say if you're passionate but you don't have experience talking to folks?
Yeah.
So I used to be that person. And what I would say is, obviously you have the passion, right? You know what you're calling about. That's what they want to hear. It doesn't matter if you know the granular details of a bill. They know that the public doesn't know the granular details of a bill. What they want to hear is, what do my constituents think about this issue that's in front of me, and how can I help serve my constituents that I'm working for? Because they work for you. So it doesn't matter how well versed you are. If you care about something and you really want to advocate for that issue, don't be hesitant to call. And remember, the people answering the phones are staffers. they're your age, and they probably know about as much about the issue as you do, the people answering the phones. And so it's not going to be a big deal if you don't know every little tiny small detail about that policy.
And I would say be nice and polite,
Yes,
because
yes.
I have been in offices in DC where the staffers answering the phone have been crying because people who have called them have just been horrible to them.
Same. I've been in offices here in Texas where not only constituents have called and made them cry, but sadly, people like the governor have made them cry. So yeah, absolutely be polite, but you don't have to be an expert.
Yeah, and we always tell our members, tell your personal story. Just tell them how, I've heard that there's this bill that's going to do X, Y, Z. If that passes, this is what it's going to do to me or to people I care about or the cause I care about. They really want the personalized story from, tell them I live in your district. I'm passionate about this issue because, this is what it means for me, and I vote.
And if you listen to them on the floor when they're debating, a lot of times those personal stories are what they bring to the floor. So those phone calls absolutely are things that get relayed to those members, and those are the things that stick in their mind when they go to the floor to debate these issues.
So we are at the end of our time, but if you had like one burning thing that you're like, okay, go ahead.
All right. So what are the best ways to get involved? Like the most effective ways you can get involved? And also another question is, what are your biggest goals? If you had the power to change what you wanted to change in this government today, like what are your major goals?
Okay, so 2 very fast questions. What are the best ways to get involved, and what are your biggest goals if you could change anything about government today? So we're going lightning round.
Lightning round. I would say for my organization, we have a lot of committees and ways to volunteer, and those ideas and everything from those people bubble up into what we do. Wow, I would just make government so much more transparent and accessible to everyone, so that we don't have to have this conversation of what the barriers are to walk in an office.
As far as getting involved, find the issue that you're passionate about and find people who are passionate about it like you, and join those groups because they exist for everything. You'd be surprised. And then if you're really like in education, for example, like she just mentioned, we have a lot of committees in ATPE and chances for our members to serve and to grow in leadership opportunities. So that's how you come to where I am. I just got started by liking a Facebook page, and that turned into becoming a volunteer, and then from there growing into wanting to do this full time. And then as far as what I would ultimately like to do, I'd really like for it to be a world where public education advocates didn't have to come to the Capitol and beg for change every 2 years.
There you go.
Yeah, I would say in addition to volunteering and joining up with groups, if you really want to work in this field, having experience in a legislative session, working as a Capitol staffer, even if it's an internship, that's really helpful. My first gig, if you will, I was still in college. I got hired for the session only to be an aide to a state senator. I was paid $25 a day. I remember that. And it was only for the session, but it gives you so much inside knowledge that way. The number one thing I would change is campaign finance. Having no campaign finance limits here in Texas means that a billionaire can buy a seat in the legislature simply by spending so much money. And it's really, it keeps people who are teachers from running for office. It keeps women from running for office too. And it needs to change.
Amen.
So that's that. If you still have a question, I'm sure they would love to answer it up here at the front. But if you want to take a picture with them, I'm volunteering them to take a group picture with you. But please feel free to come on down, and can we give them a round of applause?
Thank you.